So a couple of weeks ago, I attended a concert in Chicago called Riot Fest. Anybody there? Anybody else at Riot Fest? There was no riot. A little disappointed in the advertising. I thought that there was going to be there and that they would celebrate different kinds of riots. It was a whole different thing. But it got me thinking about the notion of violence. Why would we be attracted? Why would tens of thousands of people descend on Humboldt Park for something called Riot Fest? Normally you would walk away. You would want to get away from violence. But we're drawn to this notion of at least violent imagery in some ways. And so I'm going to think about the summer. It was a violent summer in a lot of ways. And I want to try to put the three talks that come after me into some context to think about it, and think about it in the context of the American Constitution and American government. So I'll give it a try. That's a big task. This image will not be unfamiliar to you if you were paying attention to what was happening in Ferguson, Missouri, just north of St. Louis this summer. These are police responding to protests after the death of Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager at the hands of the police in Ferguson. And some protests broke out, some peaceful, some less than peaceful, and the police responded in sometimes a peaceful way and sometimes a less than peaceful way. This show of arms, though, called into question the practice of the Defense Department providing local police with basically war stuff, right? And is that appropriate? Is that the way we want to conduct ourselves in a democracy? And so we'll come back to this notion in a moment. We're not averse to violence in America, right? Let's get on the table now. It's not like violence is bad. Some violence we like, some violence we love. Sports is one way you might think about we are very attracted to and encouraging of violence. Also in our popular culture, movies, stories, and think about why it's okay. Why is it okay that there's violence? Not that it's okay that maybe little kids watch it, but why are we drawn to it? For what purposes? Is it justifiable violence? When am I rooting for violence to occur, against whom, under what circumstances? Because that's going to be important. I can't title this the violence we like. I don't know that anybody likes war. I mean, there might be a few people that like war, but we accept it. We come to believe that it's an understandable, acceptable part of our lives, and that living in a dangerous world, we may have to be engaged in war. And so I have some imagery there, including a drone. And statistics underscore this in a lot of ways. I'm not going to bombard you with statistics. I just pulled a few things. 61% of Americans are supporting some sort of military involvement against ISIS. Because there's a fear that this terrorist cell is going to be disruptive, is going to create violence, and therefore we might be in favor of military strikes, engaging violence to try to prevent violence in other ways. I thought it was going to be higher than 49%, to be honest with you. 49% of people self-identify as fans of the National Football League. And you'll notice because of all the scandals in the last month or so with regard to the NFL, that hasn't changed very much. 86% of fans say that the news coming out of the NFL isn't going to deter them, isn't going to keep them away from watching their violent sport on Saturdays and Sundays, and Thursdays and Mondays, and it's pretty much on every day. We don't agree on all types of violence, though. I mean, so it was fairly clean. I mean, there's some things like, okay, we accept it, or at least we agree. We might have some disagreements, but overall, sports violence in sports, it's contained, there are rules. This is coming up more and more, right? I mean, it's been a thread for some time. Adrian Peterson brings it back into the news. Do you discipline children with violence? And how much? And under what circumstances? And are you allowed to have a stick? And if so, how big should it be? And how many times do you hit? And where do you hit? And if you don't draw blood? And so we're getting into some of the nuance of acceptable violence, whereas others are saying it's never okay to hit children. It wasn't okay when we got hit. It's not okay now. We can have reasonable disagreements about that. But we also have some agreements about violence we do not tolerate. Nobody likes terrorism. Right? Now, of course, this is a very subjective word. It's only terrorism when it's violence caused by people that you don't agree with. But we don't agree. We don't like terrorism. We generally don't accept spousal abuse. Doesn't mean that people don't engage in it, but we think you won't get a poll that says 70% or even 20% of people say, yeah, it's okay to beat around your spouse if you need to. But more than that, and maybe tied into this, we don't like violence committed against us. We're always against that, right? I like some violence, but I don't want violence committed against me. maybe BDSM circles notwithstanding, but for the most part, we don't want violence committed against us. You can Google that later. Then the question becomes then the degree to which we identify with a victim of violence, right? And identify that person as a victim in the first place. So I have Michael Brown here, and also Janae Palmer, now Janae Rice. This is a NFL player Ray Rice's fiance during when he hit her, and now his wife. And Michael Brown, of course, is the slain teenager from Ferguson, Missouri. How do we identify with them? How do we make, because our degree to which we can identify with them is the degree to which we can find it improper that violence was committed against them. And if we fail to identify with them, then we may rationalize, to some extent, the violence being appropriate. Did she ask for it? Did she do something to provoke it? What did he do? Was he aggressive? Did the officer fear for his life? We start making these questions, and it gets deeper, right? We start to scrutinize victims. The New York Times got in a lot of trouble August 24th when they referred to Michael Brown as no angel. A lot of people said, well, do you have to be an angel? Did he have to be an angel to not deserve to be shot by police when he was unarmed? Right? Is that what we need? We have to have the victims to be completely innocent, have a squeaky clean background, or should we dig through their past and find some reason that they probably deserve this? And why would we do that? We do it because we have to understand and appreciate that our system is just, that it's fair, that of course bad things happen, but when they happen, it's not systemic, it's because of some bad apples. Some bad people do bad things. But as we see more and more, particularly young black men, dying at the hands of police officers, many of whom are unarmed, we start to draw threads and start to question whether something beyond individual action is happening or whether or not there's something systemic. But that only works if we have an ability to identify with the victims. All of that isn't rooted in race necessarily, but some of it certainly is. So we can justify violence when it's against the other, right? We're okay if it's ISIS, right? Kill them all. Just make them stop. The world's a better place if they're not there. Saddam Hussein, not a lot of tears shed in the Western world in particular when Saddam Hussein is killed. Nobody cares if something bad happens to the Cleveland Browns except for Dr. Chad, right? If the Pittsburgh Steelers really get a Cleveland Browns, right? Then that's okay. We have a picture here of when Osama bin Laden was killed. People taking to the streets chanting USA, celebrating the death of someone, celebrating that violence. Justified? Why? Because he was at the hands of violence committed against us. We don't accept that. It can't be committed against us. And so we come back to this image in Ferguson. What's going on in the summertime? What's happening as a result of this black teenager being shot without having been armed? And as a result of that, the protests come forward. This is a constitutional right. Not just freedom of speech, but to peaceably assemble. It's in the Constitution, right? There's a lot of stuff that's also constitutionally protected that isn't explicitly in the Constitution, right? Penumbras and all this sort of stuff. But that's right in there. It's right there. Just in case you didn't know, I printed the First Amendment there for you. It's right there. Don't shoot, right? This was the protest in Ferguson. Don't shoot. It's very symbolic, powerful. Lots of people walking the streets, particularly black and brown people, joined by some white folks saying, don't shoot. Don't shoot. And it reminds us when the clash between the police and the protesters of a time that we'd like to think was well in the past during the civil rights movement. Powerful imagery, using dogs against protesters, fire hoses, right, to keep the crowds in order. Again, a racial clash. But when we draw the parallels, it's uncomfortable because we have a black president. We're supposed to be post-racial. How can this possibly be happening now? One of the things we come to learn is that the perceptions of what happened, not just to Michael Brown, but in the aftermath, also have important racial connotations. So I just pulled a few things. This is from a New York Times poll, the third week of August of this year. And the overall question is, should local police have these military weapons in vehicles that you saw in this imagery? Assault rifles, tanks, or should these be reserved only for the military and National Guard? 26% of Americans think it's okay that the police have these weapons. But if we drill down a little closer, we can see that twice as many whites than blacks believe that it's okay. Why would that be the case? Where are the chances, right? Because you're probably not going to see those tanks rolling down Ogden Avenue in Naperville, right? I mean, the chances of them being used in heavily black or brown areas are greater, so you might understand why there might be trepidation among communities where they might see them. These two questions, the top question on each is that whether the shooting of Michael Brown was justified or not. 57% of black adults said it was not justified, and almost all the rest said they weren't sure. They wanted to reserve judgment because we still don't know, right? The investigations aren't complete. We haven't had reports yet. Didn't know enough to say. Only a very small percentage saying it was. But if you look at white Americans, still, most people aren't willing to say, yeah, it was absolutely justified. But only 18% immediate reaction was that it wasn't justified. White folks were much more willing to wait to find out what the report said before they made a decision. Furthermore, then they asked about confidence about the investigation. How much confidence in the local authorities that there would be a fair investigation. And again, you can see the discrepancies are tremendous. Only 11%, you could say 35% of black respondents thought that it would be, compared to 62%. Again, twice as many white respondents believed that this was going to be fair. This is their experience, is that the justice system is fair. And I think this is my last, so I'm not going to overwhelm you with these kind of data. But what about the protests? Forget about the Michael. What about the protest in response? Again, did the protesters go too far? 43% of black adults said, yeah, the protesters probably went too far. We know that there was breaking into stores, there was looting, there was violent acts that might have been detached in some way, although stemming from the frustration in the community. Whites, 67% say they've gone too far. The second question has to do with the police response, though. Only 27% of white folks thought the police went too far, but double that number, almost double that number of black respondents thought that the police went too far. National Guard troops, again, I think the important thing to look at here is the middle category, which is who's making it worse, right? 38% of black adults said bringing in the National Guard made it worse. Only 17% of whites thought that was the case. Okay, so again, we're trying to situate this all in the idea of what does it mean to live in a representative democracy and have reasonable people struggling over these big questions. Let's not forget that this Constitution is bloodstained. Right? It comes a decade after a bloody revolution, and we celebrate that. Right? 4th of July, we got fireworks and hot dogs and whatever the heck happens on the 4th of July. And Memorial Days, right? We celebrate the battles and the people that have fought. And so it's not violence itself that we abhor. We abhor certain types of violence, and we constantly have to be mindful, and I urge you for the rest of this hour, as the others are speaking, to try to think about who's the victim of violence, who is the aggressor, and with which party do we most closely identify. Thank you.